Welcome to the New Age Masonic Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the New Age magazine, predecessor to the Scottish Rite Journal. On this podcast, we take a deep dive into the articles of the history, people, and lessons of Freemasonry as written in the New Age magazine and their pertinence to both everyday, personal, and Masonic life. Hosted by brothers Maynard Edwards, 33rd degree, Matt Bowers, 32nd degree, and Chris Ruley, 32nd degree KCCH. Articles from the New Age magazine read by Matt Bowers and brought to you by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the world. Welcome to the New Age Masonic Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Matt Bowers, 32nd degree, Scottish Rite Mason, along with Brother Chris Ruley,
Hello.
32nd degree, KCCH, historian, archivist of the Valley of DC, author, jouster.
Are you asking to confirm that, or?
Sure, why not? But I added
Sure.
jouster. Are you into jousting?
I have not been involved in jousting. I think the last, what was it? The Knight's Tale? Was that the movie with Heath Ledger? That's probably the last jousting related activity I participated in.
Oh man, you need to go to the Maryland Ren Fest then.
Oh yes, I've been there. That's not true. I have been there.
Yeah. I actually saw one time my wife and I went and the horse would not stop moving and it was running towards the castle and it stopped dead short of the castle and threw the knight off into the wall.
No. Oh, the other thing is Medieval Times, of course. And if you haven't seen Medieval Times, you've probably seen on the Cable Guy. But that's just aging myself in terms of pop culture and TV shows.
Well, why would it be aging yourself? Because Medieval Times is still around.
Yes, but Cable Guy is very much not around.
That's true. It depends on if it's running in like a 24-hour cycle on TBS or TNT or something like that.
That's right.
So
do kids even watch TV anymore? Who knows?
Who knows? But we got way off context there for a moment. That's my fault.
We did not. No, we did not, because we're talking about things that take away from our time in Masonry.
Wow.
There
very
you go.
good.
Look at that. Look at that segue.
That was very good. You didn't even think of that until now, though. Because I certainly didn't know where I was going with anything. It was a train of thoughtlessness, as I would like to say.
Well, you know, when you've worked with Maynard enough times, you know how to do the radio style of let's bring people back. Let's bring people back to the conversation.
Maybe. And just for anyone listening, we're normally a trio with the illustrious Brother Maynard Edwards, 33rd degree. He's the host of the Tyler's Place podcast. You see him on a lot of our YouTube stuff, but he is currently on assignment, and he is literally on assignment for the next 2 weekends. So
I know something about that too.
You do. The good and the bad and the ugly.
Yes. And then, and all three of them will be with me with Maynard.
Well, I won't be there. So I don't know how I don't figure into any of that mix. Probably the ugly
Bowers, what are we talking about today?
Beats the hell out of me. Anyway, what we're talking about today, what we do with this podcast is we take articles from the New Age magazine that was the predecessor to the Scottish Rite Journal, first published in 1904. Right. And we take those articles and I do the readings much like I do for the Scottish Rite Journal podcast. And then typically the three of us, but for the previous episode and this one, it's just me and Brother Chris. And we discuss the ins and outs of that article. Chris, a lot of times, will give us background on the article, like the previous one, where it was first presented. And this article is from
November 1997.
1997. Is Freemasonry Right for You? By Brother Dara S. Effendaria.
Esfandiary.
Thank you.
The only reason I know it's Esfandiary is because there are two Esfandiary brothers, both members of my mother lodge, and this is one of them, Dara and yeah, there are actually two Esfandiary brothers.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because when I finished reading and I was looking at the little information at the bottom, he is from Potomac Lodge, and I was like, well, Chris has got to know this guy.
Yeah. I believe this is what, 1997. So
yep.
This is certainly a little bit before my time, but I know his brother Austin.
Okay, so what we'll do right now, before we get into the meat and potatoes of the article, is Freemasonry right for you? While Masonry yields no direct financial dividends, the impact of the craft on a member's mind and heart is what good men and their families today fundamentally crave and need. Recently, a brother who was relatively young, morally sound, intellectually bright, and professionally advanced posed a rather alarming question. In a letter to me, he stated, "I am seriously thinking about either reducing my role or leaving the craft. My heart simply isn't in it, and despite the benefits of new and cherished friends, I just find myself questioning what I am doing in Masonic meetings rather than being with my family. I have difficulty in taking it as seriously as others do." I found this statement alarming for two reasons. First, I know this brother is a true and upright Mason. There was no arbitrary or flippant remark. It was sincere. Second, in the last couple of years, I have heard the same sentiments expressed by a number of other brethren who are young, active, and successful, both in Masonry and in their professions, and I have observed the withdrawal of yet more young brethren from various lodges in this and other jurisdictions. They are the caliber of brethren who could be tomorrow's leaders. I also realized that these thoughts and feelings, while brought to words and action by a handful of brethren, are likely to be a subject of contemplation by many more. Clearly, any demand the craft makes on our time is in direct competition with a myriad of other responsibilities and opportunities, professional, academic, social, and recreational. We live in an age where society places strong emphasis on externalities like appearances, material value, net worth. Our society seems to regard a person's external attributes before valuing his internal qualities. This social philosophy is just the opposite of the crafts where we bestow the honor of membership only on men with strong internal qualities of sound mind and good character. As a consequence of this non-materialistic value base, we enjoy a membership of strong moral character and of great diversity. Indeed, it was brother, then President of the United States, Harry S. Truman, who, during the course of a lodge meeting, reportedly admonished his chauffeur, also a Mason, to address him when in lodge not as Mr. President, but as Brother Truman. Even to the leader of the free world, his external status was of no more or less importance than that of any fellow Mason. While Freemasonry can nourish each member's heart and mind, it cannot and should not replace a man's duty to provide for himself and his family. This burden is not to be underestimated, for in today's society there exists fierce competition to attain elusive degrees of financial, professional, and social status. It is therefore not hard to see why so many people live to work and are spending more and more time, especially their discretionary time, in activities that promise to strengthen their family not emotionally, but financially. Freemasonry offers something entirely different, an abundance of morally, philosophically, and intellectually enriching experiences, all available in a non-threatening, non-judgmental environment. While Freemasonry yields no direct financial dividends, the impact of the craft on a member's mind and heart is what good men today fundamentally crave and need. For it is equilibrium, personal balance, and inner calm, which we derive through the lessons of Freemasonry, combined with Masonry's universal fellowship that serves as pillars of strength to modern man's vulnerable heart and fatigued mind. Freemasonry provides an environment for the attainment of equilibrium and peace. These are not items of luxury, but essential life tools that help make a more healthy, dynamic, and confident person better equipped to take on the many challenges of life. At first glance, it may appear time spent towards the craft could have been used better in the garnering of wealth, support of the family, or the pursuit of refreshment and recreation. If one looks no further into this issue, the expenditure of time in the craft becomes increasingly difficult to justify. not only in the mind of the professionally active and aspiring brother, but also in the minds of his family members who may reap no immediate or tangible benefit by their husbands, fathers, or sons' involvement in the craft. In fact, this expenditure of time for the craft may appear to undermine the family's financial status through missed opportunities and time lost. In addition, involvement in the craft frequently comes as an inconvenience to the brother's family members, for instance, causing them more work in business and in the care of dependent children and parents. Although the family members may fully endorse, support, and perhaps even encourage the man's involvement in Masonry, the added burdens associated with his being at lodge, coupled with today's boundless socio-economic pressures, potentially make his involvement in the craft increasingly strenuous, contentious, and ultimately tenuous. The harmonious and mutually supportive division of time between the Mason's fraternity, his quest for financial growth and stability, and his responsibilities to his family is an art few Masons have mastered. Frequently, a Mason feels like all these areas are undermined or, at best, put on hold when time is spent for the craft. Similarly, Masonry's quest for character development, moral strength, and intellectual refreshment seem disrupted or delayed when competing with the demands of family and the pressures of the financial marketplace. Yet despite their apparent mutual exclusivity, professional success, family enhancement, and Masonic involvement with its resulting inner benefits are actually mutually supportive and complementary. The key is being able to manage all of one's responsibilities, ambitions, and needs with equity and regularity. We may have a good sense of what we want out of life, perhaps even the wisdom to know how we might set about to achieve it. But taking the time, as valuable as it is, to define and structure our personal goals and priorities is necessary and very beneficial. We must utilize effective time management techniques, apply a laser-like focus towards the achievement of clearly defined objectives, and always circumscribe our passions. These are Masonic principles that have existed since time immemorial. They are likely to survive any personal difficulties or contemporary social obstacles. Presently, we have the opportunity to utilize Freemasonry's working tools to improve ourselves, thereby enhancing our abilities to achieve greater successes and happiness in the home and on the job. At the same time, we can be active partners and leaders in the shaping of Freemasonry's future successes for the benefit of our children and their children. Will Rogers, American humorist and 32nd degree Mason, succinctly stated the key to this philosophy. If you want to be successful, know what you are doing, love what you are doing, and believe in what you are doing. Is Freemasonry right for you? Yes. And we're back with Brother Chris. I am Matt Bowers. Brother Chris, do you have some background on this article like you have before?
Not outside of the context. I think these articles in 1997, there was a series of, Freemasonry. If you look at the old articles from like 1904, the first generation of articles, and even into the, 1930s, 1940s, there was a lot of discussion on, esoteric topics, a lot of things about politics, the world, what's going on in the world. As we headed into the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of Americanism. There's a lot of stuff about patriotism. There's a lot about, hey, do you know about, Paul Revere and Ben Franklin and George Washington and how they helped, become a good citizen. As we're heading into the 80s, 90s, and really even the 2000s, we see more articles that were focusing on internal, more retrospective articles talking about oneself and the principles of Freemasonry and perhaps, implementing. So there's a lot of self-help. It's on the bucket of self-help, but it not really is self-help. But
Right.
It's the idea of like, let's talk about ourselves or let's talk about, where we're going, our thoughts and our minds in terms of how to be better men. And so this article is certainly within that sphere, right? Is
Right.
Freemasonry right for you? You wouldn't necessarily see an article like this in the 1920s or 1910s because, they were thinking about lots of different things.
Oh, for sure. 1920, remember first going through the index of those articles and just seeing poetry reading.
Right.
And I was a fairly new Mason when I first got my hands on this stuff. But I'm reading it going, this has nothing to do with Masonry. I mean, it's kind of cool.
Right.
It didn't, I wasn't sure or it seemed like back then maybe they weren't aware of their direction quite yet. And they were kind of throwing it up against the wall and seeing what sticks sort of thing. But this article, when you talked about previous decades with Americanism and stuff like that, with the time period that this article came out, was there a lull or was membership in the decline of Freemasonry overall, not just Scottish Rite, but overall?
Not Scottish Rite. So if you look at the data for not just Scottish Rite, but Freemasonry in general, Blue Lodge or craft lodges, we see the dip. We are fully by 1997, we are certainly down. We are, the height was around 1955, 1960, according to Brent Morris. And then if you look at where Scottish Rite peaked in terms of membership, total membership, that wasn't around the 1980s, late 1970s, early 1980s. So we are certainly, from a Scottish Rite perspective, coming down off the top. But from a Blue Lodge or craft perspective, it's been going down for the last 3 decades. Now, by down, quote unquote, down, what I mean is there are several other factors. The highest factor or the most contributing factor at the time was age. It wasn't necessarily that people were not interested. It was all these Masons that were coming in the 1930s or 20s or 10s.
Mm-hmm.
Well, by 1950 or 1960, they were 50, 60, 70 years old. And so a lot of them, unfortunately, were passing. And so that's why we're seeing that, or why we were seeing such a significant contribution towards deaths. As Grand Commander Cole mentioned, in fact, at the last leadership conference, we were talking about this. This is pretty evergreen.
Right.
He mentioned something to the effect of like we're starting to see over time, we're going to start to see less about death and more about perhaps demits or withdrawals or MPDs. And so that rate of death is going down as we're accounting for all those individuals who came in the 70s and 80s and 90s.
Right. The one thing that's interesting about this article, when a lot of it has to do with, how does a brother divide his time to
Right.
make the opportunity for everything in his life, family, friends, multiple jobs, if that's the case, and just his other interests. How does he do that and include Freemasonry? And the one thing that I found kind of interesting, and I didn't notice it until today, that the author of this particular article, he not only was obviously he a Mason, but he was also the vice president and chief information officer of a software company in DC. He's a member of the Scottish Rite, Eastern Star, the Quattro Coronati Lodge, number 2076 of London, England. This guy's got a lot on his plate and still has figured out a way to, keep all the irons in the fire, so to speak. Is it more a case of not having the time, or is it a greater case of not knowing how to manage time, not managing time well? And,
Yeah,
and
that's
another person that I bring up in an interview that I saw recently, this quick YouTube short, I forget the guy who was talking about, but Rob Dyrdek, if you remember, the Rob and Big Show from MTV and ridiculousness. Evidently, he is a master of scheduling his time to the max. Why take a week to get something done that I can get done in 4 hours? And then when I see I can get it done in 4 hours, can we try to get it done in 2? Again, is this more of a case of, are we forgetting how to get the most effectiveness out of our time as opposed to not having it?
right. I think there's a lot. So this is a pretty long article, right, compared to our previous article. It
Yeah.
sort of dives in. To me, I always start by reading the article and thinking to myself, who's the audience, right? And so to answer your question, to me, I feel like the audience here is a busy professional,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps slightly younger, maybe late 30s, early 40s, perhaps in the 50s, where he has a family. He has his job, as you mentioned, Brother Esfandiari. And this one, is very busy,
Yeah.
vice president of an IT firm. And so to him, I think what he's making the case is he heard, and it begins in the article. He's talking to a relatively young brother who's seeing that perhaps because of his intellectual and professional pursuits, he may not necessarily have time for Freemasonry.
Right.
And what Esfandiari is saying is that's a curious statement, because to me, it's not about just being in the room. It's not about being in the lodge room. It's about the thing. You can be a Mason without physically being in the lodge room. And we should really, as a way of custom or a tradition or a way of doing, we should really remove ourselves from this idea that Freemasonry lives inherently or only or
Right.
exclusively in the lodge room. And so what he's saying is, well, think about the philosophical, the external, or versus the internal qualifications of a man relative to being Freemason. So you can practice or serve or be a Freemason or continue Masonic education or instruction outside of the lodge room. You don't
Sure.
need to do it in the lodge room. You don't have to do it. And so I really appreciate that statement. That's a statement that I think we should all be thinking about. Yeah, if you can't make it to the lodge meeting, that's fine. To me, if there's a way of connecting with brothers, keeping up with them, perhaps purchasing a book on Freemasonry about an
Right.
esoteric topic or a leadership topic on Freemasonry, you can continue to do those same things. And now, right, this was 1997. There was no social media. But
Right.
now with social media, you can access, more sites like Reddit or Facebook or Instagram. You can follow Masonic podcasts.
Hmm.
You can really take advantage of learning more about Freemasonry than what was happening in 1997. But even in 1997, when Dara published this article, what he was saying was it's not just about being in the physical space.
Right. Well, and even if you are in the physical space, so to speak, there are plenty of roles outside of the lodge room, and when we're at labor, that you can be involved in. Lodges
Right.
have lodges have trustees, and
Right.
and they meet together to discuss the actual physical business of maintaining a lodge.
Right.
If you're in a state like Maryland, where I live, you could be a catechism instructor,
Sure.
and I've heard the stories. Catechism instructors from my Blue Lodge who have actually been asked by other lodges in other cities, wherever within the state, hey, can you come over and help out our group of entered apprentice or fellow craft or, our last Master Mason class? Can you help get them through this? So or another thing you could do, and I don't know how often these guys get together, but you have people that physically go out and investigate a prospective brother that's looking to join a lodge. I
Mhm.
remember when three brothers came to my house and sat and asked me questions and tried to bust my chops by saying, well, we don't allow tattoos. One guy was wearing shorts and I could see he had a tattoo on his leg. I was like, nice
Right.
try, you know,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So there's more than one way to skin a cat. And as you said, with the social media aspect of things, between Facebook, Instagram, not even YouTube being around back then, the thing with it now is that not just brothers, everybody can learn from it. Everybody can learn the good stuff from it. And the one thing that kills me more than anything is the bad stuff that people want to learn from it.
Sure.
They want to go to the website and you or not, maybe not so much the website, but the YouTube page that, this particular 10-minute thing has, over 200,000 hits and it's all BS. And, the legit source has maybe 1,000 hits. And like,
Right.
if you really want to learn, go to the legit source.
Right. Right. Well, sometimes the legit source is not as exciting, or it doesn't, it requires a little bit of extra work. And just like anything in life, when it requires a little bit of extra work, it tends to be a little bit more rewarding. There's a part in the article which I really like, and I sort of need to think about it for a bit. But what he makes a statement is, in our society today, so remember this is 1997, in our
Mhm.
society today, it seems to regard a person's external attributes before valuing their internal. So I think there is some weight.
Was he forecasting something to come with social media?
No, not even
Well,
that.
that's what it kind of makes it's not to interrupt you. Sorry,
Yeah, go ahead.
but
No,
it
no,
kind of
go
makes
ahead.
me think that because that whole thing for people has grown. You know, you think of influencers on social media. That thing has really grown.
Yes, but I sort of understand what he's coming from, where because if let's put on apply a business perspective to this. In business or in whatever profession that you're in, perhaps if you're in a business like, sort of just like a marketing or a business that requires you to have key indicators or a rubric that you sort of set your performance to. What you're talking about is, well, I'm not really necessarily caring about how good a worker is or how nice or kind they are.
Mm-hmm.
From a business perspective, does this employee contribute X? Did he do Y? Did they do Z? The tangible external attributes.
Mm-hmm.
So what Dar is saying in this example is there's a lot of this stuff going on, especially in business, where it's really your external, how well you're doing, how well you've achieved. Have you hit your certain targets? Have you these quantitative kind of things? Did you meet your metrics? Did you, sell X amount, or did you hit a certain target? And what we're asking, or what Freemasonry asks, is take a step back, and it's not asking you how many books you've read or how many masons you've initiated, but
Right.
it's actually asking how well have you evolved, or how you've learned something about yourself or something through education in Freemasonry. And so he's saying that mindset is really difficult to get into if you've never done it before,
Mm-hmm.
or it's something unique. And I think Masons are inherently, or people who are interested in Freemasonry and go through the Masonic experience and stay with it, they seem to understand that there's more than just these external qualifications. There are internal qualifications, and it's about becoming a good person, learning more, using these principles. And I think that runs very contrary to business, to social media. Even now, you're right, with social media, where it's like how many clicks, how many views, how
Right.
many this, how many that. It's become mechanical, it's become mathematical, it's become less human. And so what Dara is saying is Masonry serves to provide that more human touch, or both literally, right, by
Right.
engaging, meeting people physically, and just spiritually, emotionally, ethically, morally, talking about these values and principles that you don't get in a TPS report from
Right.
your.
Well, and I would say too that some of that external stuff, this might open up a little bit of a can of worms, but some of that external stuff does also happen in Freemasonry.
Right.
And I would certainly say for myself it happens because when I do a reading from a particular article from the Scottish Rite Journal, and I said to Maynard the other day, I said this one article that I did a reading for and posted in less than 24 hours, it has 700 hits on
Right.
YouTube. I said I'm not going to bet on this stuff anymore because I'm constantly losing.
Right.
What I thought was a great article and would just blow the barn doors off of everything with the number of clicks that it got, nobody cared about in comparison. Like you said, we look for those things in people, and in terms of the internal, we look for those things to make better, and hopefully those brothers are making better for themselves. But at the same time, we still struggle with a little bit of the external within the
Yeah.
fraternity too.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, on the sort of towards the end of the article, Esfandiari really dives into the role of Freemasonry, your involvement as a Mason
Mm-hmm.
relative to your family, and how time really, think about it. You could be, instead of being in a lodge meeting at night, you could have had a second job. You could have, spent more time with your family, or perhaps if you are fortunate enough to have grandchildren, you could be spending time with your grandchildren, or you can
Sure.
be doing other sort of things. And so at times, the only person, by the way, and here's what he's slightly alluding to, the only person that can make these decisions are you. In other
Right.
words, you're the one ultimately, at the end of the day, who gets to make the decision of, is this time worth it for you?
Right.
So if you think that this time is worth it for you now, great. But I think, and I'm sure you can see it, perhaps you've experienced it. In fact, I'm sure brothers who are listening experienced it. I think there comes a time when your time is dedicated. Maybe there's a new job, maybe you moved into a new house, or you're
Hmm.
moving, or there's some life event, I'll call it, and it changes and it requires more time away from masonry. To me, I think that's fine. And in fact, I wish he said something to the effect of, life is slightly cyclical, and it changes and it weaves and it bends. It's not this straight line, but it really changes over time. I
Yeah.
remember when I first had my first child, for example, I fortunately through my work I was given a little bit of time off to spend time with him. And so I actually had a little bit more extra time with Freemasonry because I wasn't focused on work. I
Right.
was focused on spending time with my new son, and then when I had a little bit of extra time, I started writing, or I was working on writing. And so it was a time that I couldn't have done while I was working. But then when you go back to work, things sort of focus. You can't go to lodge meetings anymore. You're spending more time with a kid. Alternatively, I know brothers, I'm sure you know too, who are lodge officers, older, retired. The kids are out of school. Perhaps they're out of state, and so you're coming back to Freemasonry. I sort of see these as two different classifications of people, and unfortunately, we engage with both of these different brothers the same, while
Mhm.
unfortunately we should not. I think we should be engaging with brothers who are in different phases of life and different phases of masonry differently. But I don't think we've figured that out yet. Or from a national perspective, I don't think we've found a way of engaging with a young Masonic and professional, tapping into their strengths and weaknesses and the things that they can provide versus the older, more retired the retired Masonic, let's call him professional, I guess you'd
Right.
say, Mason, who has time, has experience, has dedication that can dedicate. I think these different Masons in different parts of their lives can contribute to Masonry differently.
Yeah, you mentioned older officers in lodge. My mine and Maynard's Blue Lodge, strangely enough, our officers are all fairly young. I'd say
Right.
from the oldest maybe being, 50, maybe a year or two older, to down to, late 30s, early 40s.
Right.
And our valley a little bit different in terms of age, but we seem to have a younger core. So you touched upon for a second the birth of your first son, and now you have two,
Yeah.
and you have a day gig, you do this, but you're also a member of how many appendant bodies?
I'm active in the Scottish Rite and York Rite, and this year, unfortunately, or actually, fortunately, I'm serving as High Priest and Commander for my York Rite bodies. So this year's a little busy, let's say.
Sure. So for somebody saying that they can't fit all that in, I'm looking at a guy that's fitting a lot in and writing books. How do you,
Yeah.
do you just take things after a while and say, you know what, I'm just not going to do this, or do you figure out ways to equal all the time, or to make all the time equal for everything as best you can?
Well, I think it starts with having a conversation with the people that matter in your life.
Yeah.
So whether it's your spouse, your children, if they're old enough to have those conversations, with other extended family members, I think having that conversation is important first.
Hmm.
And one of the things that is not mentioned, or at least not overtly mentioned in the article, I think communication with your family members is certainly important to understand what those are. I had the communication with my family members to basically say, hey, this year is a unique year because I call it a leadership, quote unquote, leadership year. It's a
Hmm.
year in which I'm sitting in the East for certain bodies. And so they all recognize that, this is a unique instance. And so I expect next year, after I'm done, to take a step back
Right.
and perhaps support, but not necessarily do any of those leadership positions. I finished my year, I'm off to that. And so I think you have to understand that your level of masonry will fluctuate. It ebbs and flows in terms of your engagement, depending on the year, depending on where you're sitting, all that stuff. And so because of this, I very rarely attend Masonic activities this year. So, for example, you said, well, how do you do this? Well, right now, I don't really attend a lot of Masonic activities outside of my commitments where I'm a leader, where I'm
Right.
sitting in the chair this year.
Right.
And so I've missed, unfortunately, a lot of fun activities or festive boards and things. But I've decided to prioritize my time where I can.
Hmm.
That way, when I'm out of it, I can then enjoy those things I wanted to do this year, but I'll just do them next year. So
Right.
there will always be festive boards, brethren. There will always be new initiations. There will always be those things. And so, there'll always be a green bean, barbecue, whatever, it'll be there. So I just find it time to sort of find out what this year's more important things are. And then maybe, say 5 or 6 things, pick 5 or 6 things you really want to do
Right.
in terms of activities, do
Right.
those, and then next year, see what the next year looks like.
I think one activity that wasn't touched upon in the article, and I don't think we ever really talk about it much either. And it's definitely a leadership role because you're going places. The whole thing about being the traveling man. You don't have to just go to your lodge. If there's in Maryland, I don't know how many Blue Lodges there are, but you can visit.
Sure.
Yeah, you can become once you become a Master Mason, you can go visit places and say your job has you traveling to places and you stay overnight. Well, what greater opportunity than just sitting by yourself in a hotel room when you're done with your business for the day that you could go to a lodge and meet a group of brothers, have some fellowship with them before and afterwards.
That's right. And I would argue for a busy professional, the most important thing you can be in terms, if you're a busy professional and you can't make to Masonic meetings, I think the most important thing you can do is 2 things. It's pay your dues to make
Yep.
sure that your lodge is, your lodge or whatever Masonic bodies you're part of has the resources, because really your financial contribution is just as important as your personal contribution, your
Absolutely.
presence. The other thing is you've got a dues card. If you're a Master Mason, you've got a dues card, which means that you really have one of the most important tools in Freemasonry, which is the ability to travel. And
Yeah.
so if you can't attend your lodge's meeting, your Blue Lodge's meeting, well, then, unfortunately, wherever the reason is, that's fine. But if you are traveling, if you are a busy professional and you're traveling, well, if you're in Miami, let's say for a couple days,
Hmm.
and you're curious, go out and see where there's a Masonic lodge and just attend that meeting.
Yeah.
There are other here's another example which I certainly appreciate. There are brothers that I will not see. An entire year will go by
Hmm.
and I won't see them in a lodge meeting. But at the one time of the year I do see them is because they have said this, that, well, I will learn the middle chamber lecture, or I will learn a part in a degree,
Right.
and I will learn that for the full year, and that'll be my contribution. And so the nice thing about that is let's say you don't have a brother who, or you don't have a lot of people who can contribute every day, but you got a guy who will do the middle chamber for you, or you've got a guy, depending, obviously this is jurisdictional because some jurisdictions
Right. Right. Yeah.
also do what we're talking about. But there's a guy, for example, that says, I'm going to learn this one part of the ritual for this one degree.
Hmm.
And I'm not going to be able to contribute to anything else, but know that I'm going to be there for you guys to do this at that one time. So you tell me when the fellowcraft degree is, I'll schedule it and I'll be there and I'll knock it out of the park. And that's their contribution. To me, that is more important than coming to the lodge meeting every time, perhaps doing nothing or perhaps contributing negatively, not contributing to the degree, arguing about the bills and whatever,
Right.
the leaky sink.
Right.
I think that is I think that's a better use of one's time and a better way of engaging a lodge. Perhaps I'm ranting about it, but that's
No, no, no. The other thing that this article did with me, or did for me, after reading it a couple times and reading it outside of recording it, it put things into perspective to me of what I really wanted to do. After this year, I've decided to take, a hard step back from playing music for a couple of reasons. One, I don't get much joy out of it anymore. I'm much happier to be a fan of music as opposed to being required to learn whatever version of Jesse's Girl that I somehow haven't played, which that's not possible. I've played every version of Jesse's Girl more than Rick Springfield has. I'm sorry. It's just the case. But it made me think about what's important. What do I want to do now? What do I want to tackle? What do I want to get better at?
Right.
And it also, I find myself recently, I don't like to watch anything, but I find myself just out of habit hopping on YouTube and rolling through an hour's worth of shorts and going, what am I doing here? Well, I don't get involved in any sort of series on Netflix or Prime or Hulu.
Right.
I need to pick up a book. This needs to be better allocated time. I'm realizing I'm wasting my time on so many things that I could have the time for masonry. Now,
Right.
granted, for me, and to a large degree, we're professional Freemasons, and we do need to step away from it. But I can also learn a little bit more and appreciate and understand a little bit more if I stop wasting time.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think having that realization, you have to realize that first. You have to
Right.
make that jump in your mind and say, actually, there's a problem here, or perhaps there's a problem, there's something going on. And once you realize and acknowledge it, that's the first step towards making a change and making an engagement. Sometimes brothers don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes a lodge brother will come up to you and say, hey, brother, just wanted to let you know, man, I think, all that you're doing is great, but perhaps you might want to take a step back or let some of the new guys, or, there's lodges don't seem to have succession plans. They think they do.
Yeah.
They think that the next guy in
In the
the
West.
my senior warden will figure this stuff out, or I've given my senior warden all the tools because he's watching me. Is that considered a success, a transition plan? Maybe not. So having those conversations within leadership with brothers is helpful.
Yeah.
But that said, at the end of the day, this is an institution that, is really focused on oneself. It's on self-improvement. And so I think the first thing you have to do is you have to assess your own Masonic career, professional career,
Mm-hmm.
make that assessment, see what your contribution is. And just like what Esfandiari is saying in this article, find the thing that you love to do. And I think that's very difficult when you're a new Mason. And I'm sure this has happened to me. This happened to many guys. You are initiated or you're raised as a Master Mason, and then you go, "What's next? What
Right.
the hell? What the heck do I do? Do I just like come to meetings now and just sit in the sidelines and listen? Am I in a lodge where they're going to throw me in the officer line? Am I in a lodge where I'll have to fight to get into the officer line because there's so many
Yeah.
guys and they want to? So you have to figure out what you want to do. To me, I was more curious about learning, and so I thought, well, if in the Master Mason degree or all these 3 degrees, they tell me like I should value education, I should go learn and learn and learn,
Mm-hmm.
in my mind, it said, oh, great, then I should go to the York Rite. I should do the Scottish Rite. I should learn more about those because that's just me getting more information.
Right.
It's strange to me, at that time, I was thinking, it's strange to me as a young Mason to see all these guys who've never left their Blue Lodge. They just stayed in their Blue Lodge and that was it. And they never joined Scottish Rite, never joined, York Rite, never did on that. Because, it's in the ritual, guys. It says go out and learn
Yeah.
and go do these things. Well, that's the young age Mason in me talking and saying, well, now in retrospect, when you have a family, you have commitments, you might not, the finances,
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of tough seeing a big bill at the end of the year for all those dues and those things that you're dealing with. And like Esfandiari is saying, you're making a financial commitment here. And is that financial commitment an opportunity cost? Because you could have been working to become vice president or senior vice president of your company or your
Right.
firm, but what you've done is you've gone and spent some of that time in the lodge room practicing the middle chamber. So what's the catch-all? How do you balance that? That's all discussions that you have to have internally. But once you do, I think regardless of which way you go, you'll start to see what's more important to you, and then you should follow what's more important to you.
Well, and thinking about this too as well, you talk about the financial commitment of becoming a Mason and the reluctance or the inability or the whatever to go to lodge meetings and education. If you go to the Scottish Rite website, Southern
Mhm.
Jurisdiction,
Mhm.
and you're looking for education, we do have the Master Craftsman online program,
That's right.
which is open for Master Masons Yeah, Master Mason and up.
Master Mason's up. There's an entire program that's just there's an entire course just on the Master Mason.
Yeah, and there's education for yourself that would, I mean, if you did it every night, you could, it would probably take you a year, if not longer, to get
Right.
through. But you can also put together study groups with with brothers from your lot from your lodge or your valley to learn more together. And this is, yeah, it's some of it is a little bit of a financial commitment, but think of it this way: you're learning more, and you can do it from your home.
Yeah, and remember the in terms of financial, the commitments, it's an opportunity for you to learn a little bit about the ritual. It's an opportunity to learn a little about Masonic history, Scottish Rite, and so to me, it's sort of rather than it's an investment
Yeah.
rather than a cost. And I will say, as someone who certainly needs to be better at budgeting their time, I think the Master Craftsman is nice because you can stop at any point and get
Yep.
back. So it's sort of like Netflix, or it's on demand.
Yep.
You work on it at your own schedule. You need to take a week break because you're going to work, or you're off to a trip with the family, then you can take that break and come back to it later. So it's certainly appreciated for busy professionals.
And the funny and the other good thing about it too, it may annoy you sometimes, but you will get reminders about your attendance to Master Craftsman. I get those all the time because I've started a couple things that I haven't even gotten halfway through, and I get the email and I'm like, I know, and then I delete it. And then a week later, I know, and then I delete it. So, but it's always there for you. You're not going to get kicked out once you've made the investment to one of the programs. So in wrapping up, I enjoyed this article. It put things into perspective. It's almost 30 years ago, but it doesn't feel like 30 years ago that it was written, because so much of it, nothing's new. It's all the same
So
issues, you know, different circumstances, all the same issues. And it did help me put a lot of things in perspective.
yeah, absolutely. I think Brother Sfandieri is coming at it at the right he's coming at the question with the right series of steps and asking the right questions. It's a commitment. If you're not in that phase of life, perhaps take a look at what you can do. There is lots of flexibility in Freemasonry at the end of the day. This
Hmm.
is very much an organization that's based around flexibility. If you don't think there's a lot of flexibility, then I think you should have a conversation with your brothers, your family, the members of the lodge, to identify ways that you can contribute meaningful in a way that doesn't interrupt or impact your family and your other obligations. At the end of the day, there's a reason why in the first degree we talk a lot about focusing your time and
Right.
attention. So I think that's you got to remember the stuff that you learned in the first degree, because it's the first one for a reason. So this idea of time management is very important. And remember, things change in 5 or 10 years. People might be in a different mindset and a different outlook. And so, this idea of coming back to Freemasonry, don't think of it as a negative, think of it as another opportunity. So, just because you're not, or perhaps you joined Freemasonry when you were younger,
Right.
you had to step back from it for professional or some other commitments, but now you're thinking about coming back to it. Consider it another opportunity, because Freemasonry will always be there for you.
Everyone, hope you enjoyed our conversation, my reading of the article. I am Matt Bowers, 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason, along with Brother Chris Ferrulli, 32nd degree KCCH, historian, archivist for the Valley of DC, author. What's you got any books coming out soon there, Chris?
Working on Brother Lafayette. It's in layout. We'll have that in the summer of 2024.
Oh boy.
Yeah, that's gonna be a long Maynard and Chris video, I'm sure. And that's a
Awesome.
traveling one because we're gonna go to see the Lafayette statue with the apron on it. Have you
Oh,
heard of
cool.
that? In Havre de Grace, there's a Lafayette statue where the Masonic Lodge, when they have their meeting that night,
Hmm.
go out to the Lafayette statue and put an apron on Lafayette, and that's a sign throughout the town to let people know that the lodge is meeting. So that's a nice little teaser on our Lafayette video that's coming.
That's pretty cool. Alrighty. Well, thank you for listening. New Age Masonic podcast. We're doing them at least once a month. Brother Maynard Edwards, 33rd degree. He is currently on assignment to two conferences. We affectionately referred to him last time as the biscuit for the two-piece. We hope to have him back sometime soon. We don't know. We'll see how he's feeling. But I'm Matt Bowers. That's Brother Chris Ruley. We'll see everyone next time.
Bye.